we're going to dig into some of the substance of the brief. And I'm delighted to have you both welcomed here to our stage. Eric Baxter is Senior Counsel and Vice President at the Becket Fund for Religious Liberty, where he's worked since 2011. Eric has extensive experience advising religious institutions on higher education and defending the religious freedom of students on public school campuses. And Eric frequently appears, you may recognize him, on national broadcast and in print media. So welcome, Eric. Leslie is an attorney who serves as the Vice President of Legal Affairs at EdChoice. She works with partners across the country to support the passage, expansion, and implementation of private choice programs. Leslie is an attorney with an extensive state legislative and executive branch experience. And in Indiana, she was the first woman chief of staff to the Speaker of the House, counsel to the Senate President, and General Counsel Elections Deputy to the Secretary of State. Welcome, Leslie. So the goals of this panel today is first to understand the fundamentals of religious freedom, and then to get a more clear picture of how public policy and these legal challenges, especially related to school choice and religion in schools, really unpacking that so that the folks in this room understand that landscape. And then really, as all things we do at the Policy Circle, we want to empower you to really take informed action as it relates to religious freedom and advocating for your rights. But again, as Governor Youngkin said, and also understanding your responsibility in the process. So I'm going to start with you, Leslie. You've been involved in fighting for educational choice for a long time. And I really would love to know sort of what are some of the historic changes, those landmark cases that you can point to that now are in place, and we're seeing the momentum in more and more states passing this legislation. Kind of talk us through your role at EdChoice and how you have seen the landscape change.
Thank you very much. And thanks to all of you for being here today. This is a very inspiring group. The groups are not always inspiring that I speak to. Sometimes they're a little hostile. And this is a lovely way to start today. Thank you. Well, so Stacy is right. I've been doing this for a very long time. In 1986, I was a young lawyer in my first private practice, and I had a case. There was a woman who came in with her daughter. And the situation was this. The woman and her husband had divorced. They had both attended an evangelical church that had its own school. So their daughter had attended this school, done very well there. She was about to go to high school, but after the divorce, the husband split from the church and said, "Oh, I don't want my daughter to be taught there." And so he wanted his daughter to go to the public school. The mother, my client, said, "Over my dead body." Now, she was a very soft-spoken woman, but she was not soft-spoken on that point. So we went into trial. And as a young lawyer, I have to tell you, I was a little intimidated. I was up against an attorney who had not lost a trial in 10 years. So I dug into this case. I didn't know anything about private schools. I went to all public schools. I didn't even know anybody who ever went to a private school until I went to college. So one of the first things I read, however, was in 1984, A Nation at Risk, that report that spoke to the deficiencies in the public schools and how learning and achievement had just taken a big dive and we were in trouble. So that was one of those things that I realized, ooh, that applies to me, so I wonder what I didn't learn that I should have learned, but I saved that for another day. At any rate, so we had a 5-day trial. The only question was this: who is the proper person or entity to decide where and how a child is educated? Who decides? The ex-husband took the position that, well, the government should decide. The school board, wherever the lines are drawn, parents really shouldn't have anything to do with that. They'll be biased. And you know what the mother said. um, so on the fifth day, it was about 3:30 in the afternoon, the judge delivered the decision, and we won. I was so excited for so many reasons. It was just a beautiful day. When I went home, I hadn't participated in my real life for a long time preparing for this trial, so I decided to get a glass of wine, put my feet up, watch the evening news, and see what was happening in the world. When I did, the top news story that day was about a high school and some children. When they were boarding the bus to go home, they got into a fight with each other, and they started shooting each other. That is the school that my client's daughter would have attended the very next day had I lost that case. Well, that still, to this day, gives me goosebumps. That case really stuck with me. And I just couldn't shake everything that I learned and the importance of what that mother taught me. And very specifically, nobody, not a single person in this world, knew her daughter and what her daughter needed more than she did. Nor did anyone else have the right to decide how and where her child would be educated than she did. In that instant, I realized everything she told me was true. Now, that was in 1986. Like Stacy said, it's been a while. There was no national movement at that time, but there was a lot of unrest. And I think the report, A Nation at Risk, had a lot to do with that. People started scratching their heads saying, oh, wait, what didn't I learn? What didn't I learn that maybe I should have learned? So this was happening in Indiana. This is where I live. Same thing, people were looking for options. And then 1990, we had the Milwaukee Voucher Program that came along that was then quickly followed by some other programs across the nation. And for me, I would advocate for school choice, both in my personal capacity and also in my professional capacity. But so often, the faith community played an outsized role in all of this. Typically, it was a situation where a parent would express, well, we're a family of faith, we have certain values, but then we send our child to school, and then either the values at school are different, or the values that they had were ridiculed, or there was just no discussion of it whatsoever during the day, and that seemed odd to their kids. And so there was a disconnect there between people of faith and when they sent their kids off to public school, and when they learned that their kids weren't actually learning either, that there were some deficiencies there, then this is what caused people to start rethinking, how do we want to direct the education of our children? How do we do it? What can we do? Legislators got involved, and the rest is history, so to speak. But we now are in a position where over half the country has some form of educational choice, where parents can choose how their children are educated, including a religious school.
That's right. Well, Eric, why don't you weigh in? The Becket Fund does amazing work because as these laws are passed, they're almost immediately challenged, and you have a lot of circumstances around that. Help us understand a little bit about how you all select your cases and how you sort of prioritize this with all these challenges that we see coming up in the system.
Yeah, thank you. It's great to be here, and it is truly inspiring. I'll just say quickly, my wife just got an invitation to join a book club, and she said to me yesterday, I looked at the book list, and she's like, it's so political. She says, I wish I could just find someone I could talk to that I agree with on politics, because it's just this list of things that she totally disagrees with. So I'm so excited to go home and tell her, like, oh, you should look into the policy circle. It looks like your kind of people. So thank you for that inspiration. The Becket Fund, we are a religious liberty law firm, and we defend people from A to Z. We've literally defended Anglicans and Zoroastrians and pretty much every letter of the alphabet in between. We're always looking to fill new gaps, or old gaps. So please reach out to us. We take our cases, we scour the papers, we scour the courts, we receive calls and emails from concerned citizens. And every week we sit down, a group of us at the Becket Fund, and we review the types of cases that have come in, and we make decisions about where we think we can move the law most effectively to expand religious liberty for people of all faiths. Many of those cases do involve school choice cases. We don't focus on school choice as a policy matter, but often there's a lot of confusion that we'll get into about the Establishment Clause and what private schools can and can't do, what kind of funding they can and cannot receive. And so we've done a lot of work both in that setting and also trying to expand choice for parents who do send their kids to the public schools. And I'll talk about one of those cases later, where there's a feeling in our country and a long tradition legally where we say, well, once you send your kids to school, your rights end at the schoolhouse doors. And so we're doing work to fight that trend.
You're doing excellent work, so I'm looking forward to digging into that further. You mentioned the Establishment Clause, and then we've got the Free Exercise Clause. Leslie, will you give us a quick primer on those two?
I sure will, but I have to also mention that although Eric just indicated that that Becket laws and they don't focus on school choice cases, when they do, they win. Eric stepped in to help me in the state of Oklahoma when they passed a voucher for children with special needs, and there was not a single lawyer, and I mean literally not one, even including me, who believed that we were going to win that case before the Oklahoma Supreme Court. There were actually 2 cases that went forward. It was formidable. So I called for help. Eric, have you ever been to Oklahoma? Can you help?
Now I have been many times.
Well, and he did. And so that case that nobody felt very good about the potentials for winning, we won 9-0.
Yeah.
How about that? There you go. He's good. Okay, so the Establishment Clause. The Establishment Clause is a clause that gets kicked around because it simply says that Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion. Now, we could do probably a week-long event on the question of whether that applies to the states. It does technically, but there are legal arguments that disprove that point because it's very specific. Congress shall make no law. It doesn't say state governments shall make no law. It says Congress shall make no law. So this is a debatable point. But because this is debatable, I think that this is what has given rise to the expression of separation of church and state, and it's often interpreted to mean religion's over here and state is way over here someplace, and they can't meet, go together in any way. Okay, that's false. You will not find that separation of church and state language in our Constitution. It's just not there, and our founders certainly envisioned a point that Governor Youngkin talked about. He's a man of faith, and he's the governor, and he doesn't give up his faith when he walks through the doors of the State House. It's who he is. He brings his values to his work, and that's how it is. Now, when you get to free exercise, and this is where it impacts education in a very direct way. When territories were granted statehood, Congress required that every state would adopt a provision saying that there shall be public schools and that no state money should flow to private schools that are religious. Those are called Blaine Amendments. They're in, I think 37 different state constitutions. They don't mean very much anymore, though, I'm happy to say, because here's the thing. Even though this language says that the state shall provide for public schools, it does not say the state shall not provide any other kind of education. And in educational choice, it's very simply that the money for a child's education that the legislature will appropriate for a child, that money goes into the hands of parents. When that happens, at that point, when the parent directs the money, there's a break, a legal break between the government and the parent. And then the parent decides what to do. send the child to a religious school or not, or now with education savings accounts, there are a variety of other different uses. But we have fought the battle over Blaine amendments over, I think it was a period of 20 years, both at the state level and then finally up before the U.S. Supreme Court. There was a case called Espinoza versus the Montana Department of Revenue. Rose out of Montana. The very simple setup to this, which will help to explain in real terms what the free exercise clause means. There was a woman named Kendra Espinoza. Montana adopted a tax credit scholarship program. She had two beautiful little girls. And at their school on the playground, the girls were bored. Okay, yeah, you know, you can only swing on a swing so many times. So this is what one of her daughters told me. She said, Mrs. Hiner, it gets boring out there. So she and a couple of her friends, though, they went to similar churches, and they had Bible study, and so they decided, okay, why don't we do some Bible study at recess? So they did. Okay, now recess wasn't boring, except they were bullied, they were harassed, and nobody really cared. Kendra approached the teachers and said, well, you know, what are we going to do about that? So, well, I can think of many things that you could do about it, but it was just overlooked like, well, you're religious, so, you know, it's just part of that. When she had the opportunity then to get a scholarship so the children could go to a private school, Stillwater Christian Church, suddenly the girls were relaxed, they were happy again, they started learning again, and everything went back to normal. Then when the state said that no, you can send your child to a non-religious private school, but no way, you can't be using this money to go to a religious school. She said, no, I'm the mom here, I have certain rights, and I'm gonna fight for my kids. The free exercise rights involved with this. We have, under the US Constitution, a right to be people of faith, to practice our faith, not only privately, but publicly. We don't have to hide under a rock. And we have the right to participate, as the governor said, in government activities, school activities, and all activities of life. This is the free exercise clause. And so in that case, the issue was this, that the money from the state was not going to Stillwater Christian Church. That's not where the money was going to. It was going to Kendra Espinoza. She was the one empowered. She was the one who decided that her children needed to attend this religious school. And so they did. And by the state telling Kendra that she couldn't do that, that was a violation of her free exercise rights under the US Constitution. When the state of Montana said, oh, no, but that doesn't really apply to us because in our state constitution, we're stricter on that religion thing. The US Supreme Court said, oh yeah, who do you think you're talking to here?
It's gonna trump that for sure.
Yeah, the US Constitution trumps state constitutions in this way. You cannot have a provision in your state constitution that takes away someone's rights under the US Constitution.
Right.
And that's what these Blaine amendments were doing for many years, up until recently.
Yeah, that's a great example for us to understand exactly how this works. Eric, you are involved right now. We talked the other day, you were getting a brief ready, so I know you were in the trenches fighting this fight. Talk to us about some of the cases that you've handled recently, and then perhaps some that you have in the pipeline right now that you really feel like are addressing some of these issues that Leslie brought up, but then also you're dealing with some things around public school too that I think is interesting, and we all need to better understand what's happening there.
Yeah, as Leslie explained, for a long time there have been these state Blaine amendments. There's a fascinating history, speaking of things you don't learn in public schools. When I came to Becket and learned about the history of Blaine amendments, I was like, wow, I never knew this part of American history. It's a fascinating period. But so 38 states have these Blaine amendments that have been used to stop funding to going to religious institutions. And it's not just schools. It's the work that the First Lady was talking about when you're trying to help prisoners reenter and religious groups want to help. Other organizations would come in, the Freedom from Religion Foundation, American Atheists, they would sue the state and say, hey, you can't let funding go to a religious institution, even if they're helping with these civic efforts. So this was a big problem for religious schools that wanted to receive voucher funding or other kinds of state assistance. The Supreme Court in the last 6 years has 3 times said, hey, once you open funding to private entities, you can no longer exclude participants because of their religious status or use. That should open up a lot of funding that previously was restricted to religious institutions. Unfortunately, states get very clever and they're looking for other ways to get around this. So Maine was the last state before the Supreme Court on this issue. The Supreme Court struck down their efforts. They said, we're not going to exclude schools because of their religious status. We're only going to exclude them if they act religious. So they actually appointed someone in the state government to go through the website and decide. They admitted this in the Supreme Court. They were going through the websites of these schools and saying, like, okay, they have a religious name and founding, but they don't actually do religious stuff. So, okay, they get funding. Oh, this school, they make their kids go to chapel, or they have prayer before class, so they don't get funding. I mean, can you imagine admitting to the Supreme Court, yes, we as the government, we decide who's too religious to get funding. It was absolutely crazy. Supreme Court struck that down. Well, Maine, the very next, while this was going on, they're scheming, saying, if we lose, how do we get around this? So they're like, well, we're going to just impose secular requirements on schools that will incidentally only affect religious schools. So, for example, we're going to say you have to use a certain kind of curriculum that they know will be objectionable to religious schools. Or they say you can't discriminate on the basis of religion, or you can't discriminate on the basis of sexual orientation or gender identity, which these schools don't do, but they may require their students to live by their religious standards as they attend. That effectively excludes religious schools from the state funding, even though they're really just trying to participate on equal footing with everyone else without having to give up their own values. So we have 4 or 5 cases right now in states. I'm handling one in Minnesota where the Minnesota legislature, there in that state, they have what's called the Post-Secondary Enrollment Options Act, where students in their junior and senior year of high school can go to college on the state dime and get credit for both high school and college. And this has been going on for 40 years. Crown College and Northwestern St. Paul are 2 of the largest, together are the largest providers of these credits for high school students. So they have thousands of students every year who go on campus, take college classes, get high school credit. The state pays for it. After 40 years, the state suddenly said, oh wait, we don't like that these schools have a statement of faith, require a statement of faith for their students. If you want to go on campus, you have to sign a statement of faith. If you do the online option, you don't have to sign the statement of faith. They're trying to build a community of people who want to live their values while they receive their education. And so the state passed a law that said that no funding can go to otherwise eligible institutions that require a statement of faith or that discriminate on the basis of sexual orientation, gender identity, and so forth, religion. And so what you have is the state basically, and you have legislatures in this process saying like, oh, they have their anti-LGBTQ screeds is what they call them. They basically are attacking religious institutions on the floor of the legislature, even though these institutions are a huge part of the fabric of society in Minnesota, and excluding them from funding. So we are representing 2 families and the 2 universities saying, hey, once you've opened this funding opportunity, you can't exclude people or bar them from participating just because they do religious things. Other states, Maine's doing the same thing, Colorado, California, we're seeing these across the nation. So we're just looking forward to another chance to be at the Supreme Court and get another win on this issue.
So Eric, just real quick, can you add to that what just happened in South Carolina? Because we read that in the news, and we saw that a program there was struck down. Could either one of you, give us just a really quick, because we're almost out of time. I want to give a little rundown, because I think that was one of the things where the parents had access, and they had already sending their kids to school, utilizing, I think, a scholarship sort of program, and then it was struck down. Is that correct? Tell us just real quick, either one of you.
Yeah, that's correct. There were 2,800 children who were participating in the program. The setup is this, that the Supreme Court of South Carolina heard the case in March, and everyone in believed that they would have to make a ruling before school started. Well, they didn't. So then, of course, we believed, oh, that looks good. So clearly things are going in that direction. But that was a false assumption, albeit reasonable. The court just recently, now midway into the term, said, nope, can't do this anymore. And very specifically for the reason that money could flow to private religious schools. That part was struck. The court kept in the part that would allow a parent to use funding to, say, pay for a tutor, pay for therapies, pay for transportation to go to school, that sort of thing. But forget it when it comes to tuition and fees. And so now the private schools have had to get together to figure out what to do with these children. The money was distributed on a quarterly basis, and so the children were really only paid through October 31st. So the parents were panicked that their kids would be kicked out of school. So the private schools are getting together now to try to figure out how they can keep these children. If there are any donors and funders in the room, look to South Carolina. These private schools who have accepted these children are, they're going to be, I think, on the hook for this now for a while the legislature tries to figure out a path that will satisfy the Supreme Court of South Carolina. And I do believe that there is a path. It's a small, threading a needle, but nonetheless, I think that there is. So we have high hopes for South Carolina, but they really do need some help right now.
Such a disruptive decision. Eric, why don't you close us out with, if folks in the room are curious about a situation, for instance, that they're in either as an educator or as a parent, and they're concerned that their rights are being infringed upon, or they see opportunities to proceed and sort of push some of these through either the court system or the legislative system, what advice do you have for the folks in the room to navigate this tricky issue?
Yeah, I'll just give you a quick story to kind of just give you an idea of what to do. I woke up one morning, my wife was reading the paper, and she said, "You've got to sue our school board." I was like, what? I live in Montgomery County, Maryland. It's like one of those places when you hear about the crazy things in the schools, you're like, it's got to be like Massachusetts or Maryland or California. The school board had introduced storybooks for kids pre-K through 5th grade, pushing gender ideology. They said parents can opt out. They went a whole year allowing opt-outs, and then at the end of the year they said, you know what, we don't like parents opting out. We're no longer going to notify you when the books are read. We're no longer going to let you opt out. These are books about pride parades and gender transitioning and doctors guessed at your sex when you were born, that kind of thing. So sure enough, I'd been waiting to sue my school board for a long time, so we did. That case is now headed to the Supreme Court. We're asking the Supreme Court to review it. And we'll take your prayers on that. We have 5 cases right now at the Supreme Court, so we'll see what they take, but we're hopeful. But my point is that it's as simple as reaching out and, sue, sue, sue. That's our motto. But I know there are many different ways to do this. But like just speaking up, reaching out, talking to what we've loved about that case is we have seen parents from the Muslim community, from the Ethiopian Orthodox community, from the Catholic and Protestant communities. All of these parents getting very actively involved, talking to school boards, talking to county leaders, and really pushing to make a change. And so I think it's really that simple. It's rolling over in the morning and saying, like, let's call the Becket Fund and ask them to sue, or reaching out to your legislature, your county executives, and all of us together will make a difference.
Love that. That's excellent.
If I could make one quick point for what everyone in the room could do. So you're faith-based people, you're going to a church or a synagogue or wherever you practice your faith. Some of you may be pastors or rabbis. You have your own churches. The very best thing that you can do is to start a private school if you don't have one already. If you do, if your church has a school, participate in the educational choice programs that are offered in your state. If your state does not offer those programs, then call us and we'll come in and try to help you so that we can get those educational choice programs started. And now, more than ever, the religious schools are extremely important for a fundamental issue. At EdChoice, we do a considerable amount of polling and surveying, which we've done for years. It used to be the number one reason why a person would send their child to a private school was for the academics and faith. That has now been replaced. The number one reason why parents send their children to a private school is because the children are anxious. They are stressed. Stress and anxiety is the number one reason by far. Bullying is the second reason. Things have shifted, but what we find is that when a child of faith or of no faith, either way, walks into a faith-based school, that child's life is valued. And it's that piece that causes that stress and anxiety to be relieved.
Such an
And
interesting
then a
shift,
child can
right?
learn.
As you see that shift
Absolutely.
there. Well, I want to make sure you have an opportunity to ask some questions. We have a microphone available, so if anybody would like to ask our two fantastic experts any questions, I see a hand going up back there. So let's get microphones, and then I think we've got one in the back, Kelsey, right there. So first question.
Hi, thank you so much for everything you shared. I'm going to ask a really big, crazy question. I'm so passionate about school choice. I have a Christian school. We just moved here from Maryland to Old Town Alexandria. I'm emotional at how we did not know how welcoming Virginia would be to a school like ours. We were constantly fighting the state to exist. And there was always this effort to close us. Finally, we went through a lot. We're here. We've been here. We're in our third year now, but we still serve PG County. A lot of our families cross the bridge, or we have online part, so you don't have to cross the bridge. And we're constantly facing parents who, like you just said, are running from schools in the area where I used to serve because of bullying, because of feeling unsafe, because of not just bullying by students, but bullying by even teachers. So my big question is, how do we make, this is such a nonpartisan issue for me. When it comes to the lives of children, I don't understand why we're fighting about this. What is is it even possible to make this federal, that every parent should be able to choose the school that is best for their child? It doesn't make sense to me. If your child is in an unsafe environment, they're being bullied constantly. And the reason why we finally say, if you tell me a good sob story, just come on in. I'm trusting Jesus. We'll find the money. And he has provided for me for 10 years. He's always provided, sometimes out of my own pocket. But how do we make this so that at least we can...
This is a good question. It's a good legal question.
Yes.
And it's a good big legal question. So, I don't know, Eric, do you want to tackle?
Well, first, let me just say I'm heartbroken that you would feel like you have to leave Maryland. And we've had two friends in our own little church group who have basically made the choice to leave Maryland because of these types of issues. And I'm like, why are you chasing away your best people over these issues? So even though you've gone to Virginia, we still hold you as a Marylander. So don't forget about us. But I mean, I'm not probably the best person to speak about the chances of a federal law. I think there's a lot that would have to go into that. But I think at every level, more engagement from parents who care about these issues to speak up. And our own governor, who I respect, Governor Moore, for many things. When we filed this Montgomery County School Board case, he came out and said, we don't believe in book banning in Maryland. I'm like, we're not banning any books. These books are everywhere. Everybody can find them. We're just asking that we can opt our own children out when they're 5 years old and we don't think that they're ready to be introduced to these heavy topics. And so there just has to be more people speaking out and saying, hey, that's not accurate. We need to think about these things more carefully. We need more people just talking and reaching out about these issues.
Do you want to chime in on whether or not there's a federal opportunity there?
So there is one that's moving currently. There is a federal tax bill that would provide a federal tax credit for money that a parent expends on education for the child. Now currently, people have been working on that for several years. It just passed out of one committee in the House. that's as far as it's gotten so far, but that was huge. Big
Better than
victory.
nothing.
Right, but the key with the federal piece, however, is that government just seems to not be able to help itself. Okay, we get a benefit, and then the government wants to tell us what to do with the benefit and how we can use it and how we can't use it, et cetera. We are constantly fighting the regulations of government and all of these programs, and I'm happy to do it. We do it every day, but at the federal level, it's a lot harder. At the state level, you're closer to your elected officials. You may go to church with them. You see them at the grocery store. The state capitol's not far away. You can go there and make your views heard. It's different when it's at the federal level. But nonetheless, those who have been advocating for this have been very careful to preserve that part of the language, that there shall be no involvement of the federal government whatsoever in anything that happens before or after a person may claim a federal tax credit for the monies that they've expended for education.
That makes sense. All right, do we have another question? All right, we've got some more up here too.
Hi,
We've got
good
just a few
morning.
minutes.
Thank you so much. I'd love to get comments from both of you if you have experience with an entity that I'm sure we all love in this room, which is teachers' unions. What is your interface with them as it relates to religious liberty? And then specifically on the issue of race, I've heard them trying to make the argument that school choice is racist, and that just blows my mind because as a child to my schools during middle school, unfortunately, I went to a school district that had the dishonor of being the first school district ever to lose their accreditation. They were overwhelmingly African-American students in this school. It was Kansas City, Missouri. And we moved to a different district, but most of those children were trapped. And to me, that seems like a moral failure. So I don't understand this argument. They're trying to say that if you take students out, then you leave the horrible schools and it's majority black, so therefore it's racist. I don't understand that, but can you shed some light on how we can push back on that?
You're right on. Everything you said is absolutely true. The teachers' unions are probably the biggest problem that we face. And if you are a public school teacher, the teachers' union is the biggest problem that you face. They're grossly unfair to teachers. This is where I've really crossed the line with the teachers' unions. How they treat our teachers is just despicable. There is currently a large-scale international movement, actually, that our teachers' unions have begun some years ago that I am now fighting against, where the goal is to eliminate all private schools or to regulate them to death, having the same effect, and to criminalize homeschooling entirely. So that's where they stand, which puts us on the obvious other side of this, but they come about this position, and they've testified to this. I've heard them testify to say that a parent can in no way decide how a child is educated unless that parent has a degree in education. And I've even heard them say in testimony in Nevada, well, and you really need to have a master's in education before you could possibly know how to educate your own children. But that is a sincerely held belief of theirs. And so that's what we're up against. We're up against people who don't believe in parents and their rights, whereas we're coming at it from the position of empowering parents, because they are the ones who have the right and the duty. And as the U.S. Supreme Court said in 1925, in a case called Pierce versus Society of Sisters, the U.S. Supreme Court said that a child is not a mere creature of the state, that every parent has a natural and constitutional right to decide and direct the child's education, and that parent has the responsibility and high duty to do so. That is still good law. That case played very well for us in the Espinoza case and in the Carson case. It'll be 100 years next year, so we're all going to be talking about it, so feel free to do the same. I would say that given what I just told you about the position of the teachers' unions, when you hear their positions that school choice is racist or it's designed to hurt kids in public schools, that's all a lie. It's a lie that forwards their basic ideas that parents should not be making these decisions on behalf of their children. If you keep that in mind, then you'll be able to hear those messages and understand, oh, that's not really right, is it? You really are trying to further your idea that parents are not the ones who should be who should love their children. I mean, that's how I see it. If I'm directing the education of my children, I love my children. Yeah, so that's what I'm doing naturally, and they part ways with us on that point.
So I think we're out of time. I want to encourage everyone in the room, if you have more questions about school choice, first of all, the Policy Circle has a brief on this, so I encourage you, because I think it's important to hear all the perspectives, gather stakeholders in your community, gather other people in your network, have a conversation about this. Even if you think, oh, I live in a place that perhaps could be hostile to this idea, sit down with people, even if they don't necessarily align with your views, dig in and understand. And then I think perhaps you might find some consensus, because it really is about the children and making sure that every child has an opportunity for a quality education and to thrive. And then I also would say that you should visit the EdChoice table outside. You guys do tremendous work in gathering the data and understanding the facts behind school choice. So I encourage you all to take advantage of the resources. And then I also want to thank the Becket Fund. The work you're doing is incredibly important. And I think if you're in this room and you have concerns, you need to contact Eric. I think they have had a tremendous track record. So I applaud both of you. You're fighting a tremendous fight, but at the end of the day, we're going to see more children succeed and more families thrive because they do have these choices. So thank you both. And we're going to have another panel here shortly. So we've got some folks coming up here, Randon, and we're going to finish our conversation here today talking about some of the incredible work and the power of faith-based organizations. So stay tuned. We have one more coming up. So thank you both.